Unbelievable. O.M.G. You won't believe this, the OTC RECKS Bronson Reed and Bron Breakker to save the USO's Roman Reigns just did the impossible and completely shattered everything we thought we knew about the Bloodline's internal politics by saving the Usos from a career-ending beatdown at the hands of Bronson Reed and Bron Breakker in a moment so unexpected and so emotionally devastating that grown men in the arena were literally crying and the entire wrestling world is questioning whether we just witnessed the most significant reconciliation in WWE history or if the original tribal chief is playing an even deeper game that's going to destroy his cousins worse than any physical beating ever could. But here's what's going to absolutely blow your mind and make you question everything you've seen over the past 2 years. Roman Reigns, the man who psychologically tortured USO, who manipulated Jimmy into betraying his own brother, who treated his family like disposable soldiers in his quest for dominance, just put his body on the line to protect those same cousins from two absolute monsters who were literally seconds away from ending their careers. The visual of Roman standing over his fallen cousins, facing down Bronson Reed and Bron Breakker alone, is already being called the most powerful image WWE has produced in a decade. And the aftermath is even more shocking than the save itself, because what Roman said to the Usos after wrecking Reed and Breakker wasn't an apology, wasn't an explanation, and wasn't a reconciliation speech. It was something so unexpected and so psychologically complex that fans are still debating whether Roman is genuinely trying to make amends for years of abuse or if he's executing the most manipulative power play in Bloodline history by making the Usos feel indebted to him right when they'd finally escaped his control. The most infuriating part is that WWE has somehow made us root for Roman Reigns, the narcissistic tyrant who spent years making his family's lives miserable, by putting him in a position where he's the only thing standing between the Usos and complete annihilation. And now we're all emotionally invested in whether this family can actually heal or if Roman's heroic moment is just another manipulation tactic that's going to lead to even worse betrayal down the line. The question that's tearing the WWE Universe apart is this: was Roman save a genuine act of family loyalty that signals real change in his character, or is it a calculated move to bring the Usos back under his control by making them feel like they owe him their careers and possibly their lives? Let me tell you exactly how this unbelievable moment went down, why it's so much more complicated than it appears, and what it means for the future of the Bloodline and WWE's entire main event scene. The setup for this moment had been building for weeks through a storyline where Bronson Reed and Bron Breakker had formed an alliance specifically to destroy everyone associated with the Bloodline. Their motivation was simple: they saw the Bloodline's dominance as the primary obstacle preventing them from reaching the main event level they believed they deserved, and they decided that systematically eliminating every Bloodline member was the fastest path to the top. Reed and Breakker had already taken out Solo Sikoa in a brutal backstage attack that left him with legitimate injuries requiring weeks of recovery. They'd ambushed Tama Tonga and Jacob Fatu in separate incidents, establishing themselves as legitimate threats who were willing to cross any line to achieve their goals. The message was clear: they weren't just challenging the Bloodline, they were trying to destroy it completely. The Usos had been working without Roman's protection for months, having finally broken free from the tribal chief's control and attempting to rebuild their careers and their brotherhood on their own terms. Jimmy and G had been in the process of healing their relationship and rediscovering what made them one of the greatest tag teams in WWE history before the Bloodline politics tore them apart. But being separated from Roman's protection made them vulnerable, and Bronson Reed and Bron Breakker recognized that vulnerability and decided to exploit it. They'd been stalking the Usos for weeks, appearing in the background of their segments, making threatening gestures, and building toward a confrontation that everyone knew was going to be brutal when it finally happened. That confrontation came during a SmackDown episode where the Usos were scheduled for a standard tag team match. Everything seemed normal as Jimmy and G made their entrance and prepared to compete. But as soon as the bell rang, Bronson Reed and Bron Breakker's music hit, and both monsters stormed to the ring with clear intentions of causing maximum damage. The Usos' scheduled opponents immediately bailed from the ring, wanting no part of what was about to happen. Security tried to intercept Reed and Breakker, but both men bulldozed through them like they weren't even there. Within seconds, two of WWE's most destructive forces were in the ring with the Usos, and everyone in the arena knew this wasn't going to be a competitive fight, this was going to be an execution. What followed was one of the most brutal and difficult to watch beatdowns in recent WWE history. Bronson Reed and Bron Breakker weren't just attacking the Usos, they were systematically trying to injure them in ways that would end their careers. Every move was designed to target vulnerable areas: knees, necks, backs, the body parts that, when damaged severely enough, can prevent wrestlers from ever competing at the same level again. Jimmy took the worst of the initial assault, getting hit with a devastating tsunami splash from Bronson Reed that left him gasping for air and potentially suffering broken ribs. G tried to fight back and protect his brother, but Bron Breakker caught him with a brutal spear that folded him in half and left him barely conscious. The crowd was in shock, chanting for anyone, to come help the Usos. But no help came. The Bloodline members who might have intervened were either injured from previous attacks or not present at the show. The Usos' recent allies and friends were either afraid to get involved or simply not positioned to make it to the ring in time. Bronson Reed set up for a second tsunami splash on Jimmy, and this one was clearly intended to cause serious injury. The angle and positioning suggested that if Reed landed this move with his full 330-pound frame, Jimmy might be looking at a broken sternum, collapsed lung, or worse. Bron Breakker was setting up for another spear on G, this one aimed at G's head and neck in a way that was legitimately dangerous. The Usos were helpless, barely conscious, and seconds away from career-altering injuries. The crowd was chanting no, 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 in horror, knowing they were about to witness something that would haunt them. Then Roman Reigns' music hit, and the entire arena erupted in a way that WWE hasn't heard in years. The original tribal chief appeared at the top of the ramp, not in his usual methodical entrance, but sprinting to the ring with an intensity and urgency that immediately communicated this wasn't about pageantry or making a statement, this was about stopping something terrible from happening to his family. Bronson Reed and Bron Breakker hesitated for just a moment, shocked that Roman Reigns was here and clearly planning to intervene. That moment of hesitation gave Roman the opening he needed to slide into the ring and immediately start throwing hands with both monsters. What happened next was absolutely incredible. Roman Reigns, who had been away from WWE dealing with his own issues and wasn't expected to be at this show, took on both Bronson Reed and Bron Breakker simultaneously and not only held his own but started dominating the fight. Every Superman punch landed with devastating effect. Every strike was thrown with bad intentions. This wasn't the calculating tribal chief who let others do his fighting, this was a man fighting to protect his family with everything he had. The psychology of Roman's fighting was noticeably different than his usual methodical style. He wasn't working to get himself over or positioning for crowd reactions, he was purely focused on neutralizing the threats to his cousins as quickly and effectively as possible. When Bronson Reed tried to grab Jimmy again, Roman absolutely brutalized him with a combination of strikes that sent Reed rolling out of the ring. When Bron Breakker tried to spear Roman, the tribal chief countered with a perfectly timed Superman punch that left Breakker stunned. But the most incredible moment came when both Reed and Breakker tried to double-team Roman, and he fought them off while simultaneously using his body to shield the Usos from further attacks. The visual of Roman standing over his fallen cousins, taking punishment from two monsters while protecting his family, was so powerful that even fans who'd hated Roman for years found themselves cheering for him. Roman eventually hit Breakker with a devastating spear that sent him out of the ring, then turned and hit Bronson Reed with another spear that left him laid out in the center of the ring. The crowd was absolutely losing their minds, chanting Roman, Roman, Roman in a way that hadn't happened since before his heel turn. But Roman didn't celebrate or acknowledge the crowd. The moment Reed and Breakker were neutralized, Roman immediately dropped to his knees next to Jimmy and G, checking on both of them with visible concern that looked completely genuine. The camera caught Roman's face, and for the first time in years, the tribal chief looked vulnerable and genuinely worried about someone other than himself. Medical personnel rushed to the ring to attend to the Usos, and Roman wouldn't let them work until he'd checked both of his cousins himself, asking them questions and making sure they were conscious and responsive. The tenderness and genuine concern Roman showed in those moments was shocking to everyone who'd watched him psychologically torture these same men for years. As medical staff helped Jimmy and G out of the ring, Roman stood between them and the entrance ramp, making it clear that if Reed or Breakker tried to attack again, they'd have to go through him first. The protectiveness was so intense and so genuine looking that fans were openly crying in the arena, moved by what appeared to be a real moment of family reconciliation. But the aftermath is where things get really complicated and where the debate about Roman's motivations becomes fascinating and divisive. Backstage footage that aired later in the show revealed what happened when Roman and the Usos were finally alone in the trainer's room. Jimmy and G were being treated for their injuries, and Roman was standing nearby, watching silently. The tension was palpable because despite what had just happened, there were years of abuse and manipulation between these three men that couldn't just disappear because Roman made a heroic save. Jimmy was the first to speak, his voice pained from the attack. "Why'd you do that? After everything, why'd you save us?" Roman's response is what has the entire wrestling world debating his true motivations: because you're my family. And no matter what's happened between us, no matter what I've done or what you think of me, nobody touches my family. Nobody. That's not about forgiveness or making things right. That's about blood. And blood is something that can never be broken, no matter how much we might want it to be sometimes. G, looking conflicted and emotional, asked the question everyone was thinking: so what happens now? You save us, and we're supposed to just, what, come back? Acknowledge you again? Pretend like everything's okay? Roman's answer was devastating in its honesty: I don't expect anything from you. I'm not asking you to come back to the bloodline. I'm not asking you to acknowledge me. What I did out there wasn't about bringing you back under my control, it was about making sure my cousins don't get their careers ended by two guys who don't understand what family means. You can hate me. You can never forgive me for what I put you through. But you're alive to make that choice because I made sure Reed and Breakker didn't take that choice away from you. The complexity of that statement is what's making this situation so fascinating. Roman isn't apologizing for his past behavior, but he's also not using his heroic action to manipulate the Usos back into his service. He's essentially saying that protecting family is non-negotiable regardless of personal relationships or feelings, and that he doesn't expect gratitude or reconciliation as payment for doing what he sees as his duty. But is that genuine growth and understanding, or is it an even more sophisticated manipulation where Roman makes the Usos feel indebted to him without explicitly asking for anything, knowing that debt will eventually bring them back under his influence? The wrestling world is completely divided on this question. Some fans see Roman's save as a genuine turning point where the tribal chief is beginning to understand that his treatment of his family was wrong and that real strength comes from protecting rather than controlling. Others see it as the ultimate manipulation, Roman playing the hero to earn emotional capital with the Usos that he'll eventually cash in when he needs them most. What makes the situation even more complex is the Usos' own conflicted emotions. Backstage sources report that both Jimmy and G are genuinely grateful that Roman saved them from career-ending injuries, but they're also terrified that accepting that gratitude means falling back into the pattern of abuse and control that they worked so hard to escape. The question of whether the Usos can or should forgive Roman for years of psychological abuse just because he saved them from physical harm is dividing the fanbase. Some argue that one good action doesn't erase years of toxic behavior and that the Usos should maintain their distance regardless of what Roman did. Others argue that family means forgiving even terrible actions when someone shows genuine effort to change and that Roman's willingness to risk his own safety for his cousins proves he's capable of being better than he was. Now here's the question that's going to determine whose side you're on. Should the Usos forgive Roman and potentially reunite with him after he saved them, or should they maintain their independence even though Roman proved he'll protect them when it really matters? Your answer reveals your beliefs about family loyalty, whether redemption is possible for people who've caused serious harm, and whether actions in the present can outweigh patterns from the past. Here's the even more complicated question: if Roman's save was genuine and not manipulative, does that make his past abuse forgivable, or should the Usos continue to judge him based on years of behavior rather than one heroic moment? Tell me in the comments, do you think Roman Reigns has genuinely changed and his save was motivated by real family loyalty, or do you think he's playing a long game where he manipulates the Usos into feeling indebted to him? And here's what I really want to know: if you were Jimmy or USO, what would you do in this situation? Would you be able to forgive and potentially work with Roman again, or would you maintain your distance despite being grateful he saved you? Roman Reigns wrecking Bronson Reed and Bron Breakker to save the Usos wasn't just an incredible moment of action, it was an emotional and psychological turning point that's forcing everyone to reconsider what the bloodline means and whether family bonds can survive years of abuse and manipulation. The visual of Roman standing protectively over his fallen cousins, willing to take on two monsters alone to keep them safe, was powerful enough to make even his harshest critics question whether there's more to the tribal chief than the narcissistic tyrant we've seen for years. But the ambiguity about his motivations, whether this was genuine change or sophisticated manipulation, is what makes the storyline so compelling. We want to believe Roman is capable of being better, but we've seen him manipulate people too many times to fully trust that his heroic actions aren't just another means to an end. The Usos are caught in an impossible situation where they're grateful to be alive and uninjured but terrified of falling back into the toxic dynamic that nearly destroyed their brotherhood. And Roman seems to understand that complexity, which either makes him genuinely empathetic for the first time in years or makes him more dangerous than ever because he understands exactly how to use their conflicted emotions against them. The question isn't whether what we witnessed was unbelievable, it absolutely was. The question is what it means for the future, and whether the bloodline can actually heal or if Roman's save is just the opening move in an even more devastating manipulation that will hurt his family worse than any beating ever could.